Do you really think this person, can you cook for my family? Marcus Whitfield did not bother to lower his voice as he pointed directly to Isabella Santos, who organized ingredients in the gourmet kitchen of his mansion in Beverly Hills. The domestic service agency had sent 3 candidates for the position of private chef, but the 52-year-old real estate tycoon had already dismissed the first 2 after 5 minutes of interview. Isabella, 34, was the last option of a Friday that promised to end without solution. Mr. Whitfield? Nervously intervened Sarah, the agency's representative. Miss Santos has 15 years of experience in award-winning restaurants and impeccable references of, I didn't ask about papers, Marcus cut off with disdain, adjusting the gold Rolex as he walked around the marble island where Isabella remained motionless. I asked if she can meet the standards of this house. My children grew up eating in the best restaurants in the world. My wife Diane is a certified sommelier. I don't need another domestic pretending to be a chef. Isabella had never faced such professional humiliation. Graduated in gastronomy in France and with tickets for 3 restaurants starring the Michelin Guide, she had been working for 5 years as a private chef of influential families to support her sick mother in the Philippines and pay her younger brother's college. The money offered by this position represented the difference between continuing fighting and finally having financial stability. But that man's arrogance was an insult not only to his competence, but to his dignity. Excuse me, Mr. Whitfield, Isabella spoke for the first time, her clear voice cutting the tense air from the kitchen. You mentioned standards. Could you specify exactly what your culinary expectations are? Marcus stopped walking, surprised by the direct question. Expectations? Food that justifies the exorbitant salary I'm willing to pay. French technique, impeccable presentation, ability to impress important guests, things that people like you usually don't. People like me? Isabella interrupted him softly, but his tone carried a firmness that made Sarah swallow. People without pedigree, no training in European schools, no connections in the gastronomic world of elite. He crossed his arms, clearly annoyed to have been questioned. Don't get me wrong, but there is a difference between cooking for ordinary families and meeting the demands of a home like this. Isabella nodded slowly, as if processing each word. For a moment, her eyes closed briefly, and by a fraction of a second, she seemed to be elsewhere, maybe remembering something that had happened before, something that had prepared it exactly for this kind of situation. I understand your concern perfectly, Mr. Whitfield, she said, her posture changing subtly. Maybe we can do a practical test. Is there a specific dish that considers a real culinary challenge? Marcus arched an eyebrow, intrigued by sudden confidence. Beef Wellington, absolute technical perfection. Crunchy puff pastry, exact point meat, impeccable duxelle. If you can do it without recipe in a kitchen you don't know, you may consider that you are not just another person like me, Isabella added, a slight smile touching her lips. Perfect. How long do I have? 1 hour. And if you fail, I want you to get out of my house immediately. Sarah looked nervously from one to the other. Beef Wellington was notoriously one of the most technical dishes of French cuisine, a proof that even experienced chefs avoided under pressure. For a simple Philippine cook, as Marcus, clearly the road would be a perfect trap. Is there any specific restrictions on the ingredients I can use? Isabella asked, already moving through the kitchen with a familiarity that seemed unlikely to someone who had just arrived. Use everything you want. This kitchen has the best equipment and ingredients that money can buy. Marcus sat on the high stool of the central island, clearly preparing to watch what he expected to be a spectacular failure. While Isabella began to examine the ingredients available with almost surgical accuracy, Sarah whispered to Marcus, Lord, you may better check her references before. I don't need to check anything, Marcus replied, watching Isabella work. In 60 minutes I will know exactly who she is. What Marcus Whitfield didn't know was that Isabella Santos carried much deeper secrets than any curriculum could reveal. His true formation went beyond the European kitchens, and his experience with powerful and arrogant men had taught him lessons that no gastronomy school could ever offer. There, before that look of contempt disguised as a test, Isabella remained calm as one who holds a too powerful asset to be revealed ahead of time. And as their hands began to work with a dexterity that even made the skeptic Marcus frowned, a question hovered in the air. What exactly that woman had faced before to develop such confidence in times of extreme pressure? If this story of prejudice and determination is arousing its curiosity, be sure to subscribe to the channel, because what Isabella was about to reveal about himself would transform Marcus's arrogance into something he could never forget. While Isabella began to work, Marcus settled on the high stool of the central island, clearly preparing to watch what he expected to be a spectacular failure. Your phone vibrated. A message from your wife, Diane. How are you going with the new chef? I need it to be perfect for tomorrow's dinner with Japanese investors. Marcus quickly typed, "Relax. I will get rid of this in less than an hour. I already have other aligned options." He didn't even bother to lower his voice while talking to Sarah about the inadequate standards that the agency was sending. Isabella listened to each word as she carefully selected the mushrooms for the duck cells. Each derogatory commentary, each condescending laugh only strengthened something within her that Marcus couldn't see, something that had been shaped by much worse situations than the arrogance of a spoiled millionaire. At 12, Isabella had watched her mother humiliated by American bosses in the Philippines, working 16 hours a day in luxury hotel kitchens to support her family. At 18, he got a partial scholarship to study gastronomy in Lyon, where he faced teachers who openly questioned whether people like her belonged to the high French cuisine. For 5 years in France, Isabella worked in restaurants where she was constantly tested in ways her European colleagues never experienced. Renowned chefs made her redo perfect dishes, claiming lack of refinement. Rich customers were specifically asked not to be served by the Asian assistant. She swallowed each humiliation, turning pain into determination. "Interesting technique for duck cell," said Marcus sarcastically, watching Isabella chop the mushrooms with surgical accuracy. "Did you learn this in any online course?" "In fact," Isabella responded without raising her eyes, "I learned from Chef Bernard Dubois at Le Bernardin in Paris. He always said that the uniformity of the cut determines the final texture." Marcus's smile led slightly. Le Bernardin was one of the most exclusive restaurants in the world. Sarah, who had remained silent in the corner, raised her surprised eyebrows. "Anyone can memorize names of famous chefs." Marcus recovered quickly. "The question is practical execution." Isabella nodded, seasoning the mushroom mixture with a combination of herbs that made the aroma spread through the kitchen. It was a complex, professional fragrance that even Marcus recognized as exceptional. Your phone vibrated again, this time a partner's message. "You managed to solve the chef's situation. Tomorrow's dinner is crucial to closing the $50 million business." The pressure was increasing. Marcus needed that woman to fail, and fast. His reputation to always get the best of all dependent on it. "I could not admit to Diane that she had misused the situation. The oven is a little slow today," lied blatantly, stirring the temperature controls, while Isabella was distracted by preparing the meat. "I hope you know how to adjust the cooking time as needed." Isabella immediately noticed subtle sabotage, but said nothing. Instead, it discreetly verified the real oven temperature and mentally adjusted its calculations. He had faced much worse tricks during his years of formation. While sealing the meat with a flawless technique, Isabella thought of the telephone conversation she had had the night before with her mother. "Anak, are you sure it's worth working for these rich people? They will never really respect us." "Mom," Isabella had answered, "sometimes we need to prove our value to those who least deserve our attention, not for them, but for ourselves." Marcus watched, increasingly uncomfortable, as Isabella demonstrated a refined technique that he did not expect. The puff pastry was being worked with the dexterity of someone who clearly dominated the foundations of French cuisine. Their movements were economical, accurate, professional. 30 minutes remaining, Marcus announced, checking the clock with a hint of growing nervousness. "And remember, if the dish is not perfect, I leave immediately," Isabella completed calmly. "I understood perfectly, Mr. Whitfield." What Marcus didn't know was that Isabella carried something much more powerful than just culinary skills. In his carefully kept bag was an envelope containing information that would transform that humiliation test into something completely different. Information about Marcus Whitfield that he would never imagine that someone like her could have access. For now, she would let him savor his position of power. After all, the greater the fall, the more satisfactory the lesson it was about to learn about underestimating people by its origin, appearance, or accent. There, in that marble cuisine and stainless steel, while beef Wellington's aroma began to scent the environment, a silent question hovered in the air. What exactly was Isabella Santos discovered about Marcus Whitfield who would rethink each arrogant word he had just pronounced? 15 minutes remaining. Isabella removed beef Wellington from the oven, the perfectly crispy gold puff pastry, exhaling an aroma that even made Marcus hesitate to her skepticism. She had performed each step with accuracy that challenged all his expectations. "You need to rest for 5 minutes before cutting," Isabella announced, removing the thermal gloves. "It's a technique I learned from Chef Auguste Rousseau at the Michelin 3 Stars restaurant in Cannes." Marcus frowned. He knew that name. Rousseau was a legend of French gastronomy, famous for his quality and intransigence and accepting only the best sous chefs in the world. His casual mention in the conversation was impossible to invent. "Interestingly, you know so many famous European chefs," he commented sarcastically. but his voice carried a growing uncertainty. I imagine you have worked with many of them. Indeed, yes. Isabella dried her hands calmly. I spent 3 years in France and 2 in Italy before coming to work in the United States. Chef Rousseau was particularly rigorous. He used to say that technique without passion is just recipe, but passion without technique is just homemade food. At this moment, something changed in the dynamics of the kitchen. Sarah, who had remained silent, began to observe Marcus with growing curiosity. Isabella's stories sounded too authentic, too detailed to be invented. Marcus checked the phone again. Diane had sent another message. Tomorrow's dinner is with Yamamoto Industries CEO. He's extremely demanding with food. I need someone at Nobu level. Could you solve? The pressure increased. Marcus could not admit that he had so drastically underestimated the candidate. His reputation of always getting the best of all was at stake. Well, said, trying to keep control, let's see if all this confidence translates into real results. He took a sharp knife and prepared to cut Wellington, looking for any failure he could use to justify a rejection. It was at this moment that Isabella said something that changed everything. Mr. Whitfield, before cutting, I would like to mention that I recognize your last name. My last employer was very close to the Whitfield family. Marcus froze with the knife in the air. Last employer? Richard Yamamoto, Isabella answered quietly. I worked as a private chef of his family for 2 years in Tokyo. He often mentioned his business with Marcus Whitfield here in Los Angeles. Marcus's blood froze. Richard Yamamoto was exactly the Japanese investor who would come to dinner the next day. The $50 million business depended on impressing him, and Marcus had spent weeks trying to find details about his personal preferences. Did you work for Richard Yamamoto? Marcus's voice came out sharper than he intended. For 2 years. I know your favorite dishes, their food restrictions, even the specific culinary memories that thrill you. Isabella smiled softly. He has a particular obsession with a dish his grandmother used to make, a very specific fusion between French technique and traditional Japanese flavors. Marcus dropped the knife, his mind running. That information was worth more than gold. If Isabella really knew Yamamoto's intimate preferences, she was not just a qualified chef. It was the key to the success of the most important business of her career. Why didn't you mention this before? He asked, trying to mask the growing despair in his voice. The Lord did not ask about my specific references, Isabella responded with calm that now seemed deliberately calculated. I was more interested in testing if I knew how to do beef Wellington. Sarah watched the exchange with increasing fascination. The dynamics of power had completely reversed in a matter of minutes. Isabella was not a desperate candidate, to someone with privileged information that Marcus needed desperately. And what exactly do you know about Mr. Yamamoto's culinary preferences? Marcus asked, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. Isabella cut a perfect slice of Wellington. The meat was at the exact point, pink in the center, perfectly salata, wrapped in aromatic duxelles and crispy pasta. It was a work of culinary art. Well, that would be confidential information about an old employer, she replied, offering the dish to Marcus to prove. It wouldn't be professional on my part to share personal details about the Yamamoto family with strangers. The blow was subtle, but devastating. Isabella had just classified Marcus as strange about a man he was desperate to impress. More than that, she had established that she had valuable information that he could not obtain from any other source. Marcus tasted Wellington in silence. It was, without exaggeration, the best I had ever experienced. Each element was perfectly balanced, each technique performed with professional mastery. There was no denying. Isabella Santos was an extraordinary chef. What if, Marcus swallowed pride, I would offer you the position? Would you be willing to share your experiences with different international customer profiles? Isabella smiled, and for the first time, Marcus saw something in her eyes that made him realize that she had been another from the moment she had entered her kitchen. That woman was not a desperate candidate. She was a strategist who had turned her initial humiliation into an absolute advantage position. What Marcus didn't know yet was that Isabella carried much more than just information about culinary preferences. In his carefully kept bag was an envelope containing secrets about Marcus's business that would turn that negotiation into something completely different from what he could imagine. I accept the position, Isabella answered calmly, but there are some conditions we need to argue first. Marcus felt a wave of relief. With Yamamoto dinner only 24 hours away, Isabella was her salvation. Of course, anything. Salary is no problem I can offer. This is not a money, Mr. Whitfield. Isabella opened her bag and removed an envelope manila. This is mutual respect and professional honesty. Sarah watched fascinated as the dynamics kept reversing. Marcus, who had begun the interview as the almighty lord of the mansion, now hung from every word of Isabella. During my research on this position, Isabella continued, placing the envelope about Marble Island, I discovered some interesting information about your recent businesses. Marcus's blood froze. What kind of information? The type Richard Yamamoto would be very interested in knowing before closing any agreement with you. Isabella opened the envelope and removed a series of printed documents. For example, counterfeit environmental reports in the construction project in Santa Monica, or bribes paid to city inspectors to approve buildings that do not meet safety codes. Marcus staggered, leaning on the bench. How? Where did you get this? Remember Miss Carmen Rodriguez? Your former accountant you fired 6 months ago claiming restructuring? Isabella smiled softly. In fact, she discovered her fraud and you silenced her with legal threats. But Carmen is my cousin Marcus, and she kept copies of everything. Reality collapsed over Marcus as an avalanche. Isabella was not a random candidate sent by the agency. She had been deliberately planted there, armed with enough information to destroy her career and send him to prison. Carmen spent 2 years collecting evidence. Isabella continued, spreading documents through the bench. Fraudulent contracts, forged inspection reports, payment records for corrupt employees. Everything is here. Sarah, realizing that she was witnessing something far beyond a simple job interview, discreetly began to move away from the exit. What do you want? Marcus whispered, his arrogance evaporating completely. Justice. Isabella organized the papers on an ordained pile. Carmen lost his job for trying to do the right thing. Your reputation was destroyed because you spread lies about your professional competence. Whole families were harmed by their defective buildings. Marcus tried to recover some control. You can't prove anything, they are just papers, any competent lawyer. Isabella laughed, a sound that contained no mood. Marcus, do you really think Carmen and I are amateur? She withdrew a tablet from the envelope. These are recordings of their conversations with Inspector Bradley about R&Os. Carmen used a microphone during all financial meetings after discovering the irregularities. She touched the screen. Marcus's unmistakable voice echoed through the kitchen. Bradley, I need you to be creative with that soil report. $50,000 in cash as always. No one needs to know about unstable foundations. Marcus's face paled completely. This is illegal. Recording without consent. In fact, it is perfectly cool in California to record conversations when there is a suspicion of criminal activity, Isabella replied. Carmen consulted lawyers before starting to collect evidence. Everything was done following the law. Marcus sank into the stool, his mind running desperately by solutions. The business with Yamamoto, his reputation, his company, could all fall if that information leaked. What do you want from me? He asked, defeated. First, you will call each of the companies where lies spread over Carmen and publicly rectify the fake accusations, Isabella began to enumerate. Second, you will pay fair compensation for damage to her career. Third, you will commit to repair all security problems in your buildings at your own costs. What if I do all this? So, these evidence will remain stored. Carmen receives the justice she deserves, and you have the chance to redeem yourself. Isabella paused. But if you try to harm me, threaten my family, or continue with your criminal practices, Yamamoto receives a complete copy of everything, Marcus completed bitterly, along with the FBI, the local press, and all its business competitors. Isabella smiled. Choice is yours, Marcus. Voluntary justice or total destruction. Marcus looked at the documents scattered over his Italian marble bench. Each roll represented years of corruption that thought he had buried forever. Now 2 Philippines, a courageous accountant and a brilliant chef, had orchestrated their fall with accuracy that would envy any military strategist. What about tomorrow's dinner? He asked weakly. Oh, I'm going to cook for Richard Yamamoto, Isabella replied cheerfully. It will be the best dinner of your life. Who knows if you do are part of the deal? I even mentioned how much you have changed recently. Richard values a lot of people who recognize their mistakes and try to redeem themselves. At that moment, watching Isabella calmly keep the documents back in the envelope, Marcus Whitfield finally realized that she had underestimated not only a talented chef, but a woman whose intelligence and determination far surpassed her own arrogance. The humiliation he had tried to impose had become the most expensive lesson in his life. But would a man used to control everything really be able to accept his defeat? Or would you try a last desperate play that could destroy yourself once and for all? Marcus remained silent for long seconds, the weight of absolute defeat by crushing his arrogance as a castle of letters collapsing. His hands trembled as he signed every document Isabella put before him. The public retraction of lies about Carmen, the compensation agreement, the commitment to repair the defective buildings. How long did you plan this? He asked with a hoarse, defeated voice. 2 years, Isabella answered quietly, keeping the signed papers. Carmen came to me when she was fired. She knew you would try to hire another Philippine chef to replace her. so we created the perfect profile: international experience, knowledge of Yamamoto, impeccable technique. You bit the bait exactly as we expected. Sarah, who had witnessed the whole turnaround, shook her head incredulous. You have transformed his arrogance into your own trap. Marcus looked at the phone where dozens of messages from Diane and her partners accumulated. Dinner with Yamamoto would still happen, but now under completely different terms. Isabella had become not only her salvation, but her conqueror. What about tomorrow? He asked weakly. I will prepare the most spectacular dinner Richard has experienced. Isabella smiled genuinely for the first time since she had arrived. I will tell him about his change of perspective, how you are committing to ethical business practices. Maybe he is not impressed with his personal growth ability. 3 months later, the transformation was evident. Carmen had been rehired as the financial director of Marcus's reformulated company, with 40% higher salary and profit sharing. The buildings were renovated following the highest security standards, costing Marcus millions of dollars, but restoring their reputation gradually. Isabella remained as a private chef, but now treated with the respect she always deserves. His mother in the Philippines received the best medical treatment available, discreetly paid for a social responsibility fund that Marcus had created. Dinner with Yamamoto was a resounding success. Impressed not only with exceptional cuisine, but with Marcus's new ethical stance, Japanese investor tripled the value of the agreement. Men who learn from their mistakes are valuable partners, had commented. Marcus, sitting in his renovated office, was looking out the window to the almost lost city. Its corrupt practices had been replaced by total transparency. His arrogance had given way to a forced but genuine humility. Carmen entered the monthly reports, now proudly presented instead of hidden. The numbers are excellent, Marcus. Ethical practices are generating more profit than we imagined. Funny how it works, he murmured. I spent years believing that I needed to fool to win. 2 women proved me that it was completely wrong. Isabella appeared at the door, still with the kitchen apron. Today's dinner was approved by the guests, and this arrived for you. She delivered an official letter. Marcus opened the envelope with apprehension, but found a surprise: a nomination for the Ethical Entrepreneur of the Year award for his exemplary transformation in business. As? He asked incredulously. Carmen indicated you, Isabella explained. She believes people can change when confronted with the consequences of their actions. That night, Marcus rethought about everything he had lost and won. His arrogance had cost millions, almost destroyed his company and injured innocent people. But the lesson that Isabella and Carmen taught her value more than any financial profit. True victory was not to humiliate those who defeated him, but to recognize that respect is gained through actions, not intimidation. Isabella had transformed her humiliation into education, her growing defeat. Marcus has learned that underestimating people for its origin is the most expensive mistake anyone can make. Isabella and Carmen proved that intelligence, determination, and justice do not know nationality, color, or social class. The best revenge was not completely destroying Marcus, but rebuilding it as a better man. Sometimes the most powerful justice is to give people the chance to redeem themselves, proving that true greatness comes from those who raise others, not those who dump them. If this story of transformation and second chances has touched you, subscribe to the channel for more stories that show how true victory sometimes means building bridges rather than burning enemies, proving that sweetest revenge is shared success with dignity.